There we go. Just go ahead. It should stay on, and then just hit the square when I'm done. It's on now. Yep. So.
Come around this way if you there's a lot of squish.
Yeah.
Too much, but I think
All right. Well, good morning. I know this is different. I've been we do this the Saturdays when we meet for discipleship. We put 3 tables together, and there's about 10 or 12 of us, and we sit at these tables like this, and it seems kind of different, and we can have a good conversation, whatever. So I thought I've been kind of wanting to try it, but this week I'm gimping. I've got an infection in my foot, and it's pretty bad, and so I can't stand for long periods of time. So I have to sit to teach today. So I said, well, I guess we're going to try this today. So, but so if you guys like it, we can do more of it, or go to this or whatever. If you don't like it, once I get healed up, we will go back to regular. So
we did this one time at all the tables we were around. We were all a year ago.
Okay.
Well, the first Christmas, Danny and Bridget were
there.
Has that been 1, 2?
Yeah.
Anyway, Linda Wilson had all the front tables, and she said, we need to talk to each other. And she got a couple of men, and whoosh, she had a big line of straight tables.
Okay.
That's the reason she did that. But
so
you're on the right track.
Yeah.
So that worked really well.
Mm-hmm. Okay. So anyways, we are starting a new section today. We finished up Psalm 119 and got through all 176 verses, although the last one I did was like 50 verses because I just kind of ran through it.
Talk about disturbing this.
So
that's what 40 years of marriage would do. 41.
So okay. Before Mr. Hank gets in more trouble, let's. But yeah, we are starting with. I really kind of felt like God was laying this on me about doing a deep dive into the life of Moses. I mean, we know about Moses. We know we ask somebody about Moses, and they say, "Oh yeah, the burning bush," or he led the people out of Israel or out of Egypt, and and all that. Just different points. But a lot of people can't tell you about all the events that took place in his life that it talks about throughout the book of Exodus and stuff. And so we're gonna talk about those. We'll kind of brush over some maybe, but we're gonna talk about each one and stuff and really try to draw some, because I think there's a lot of application that we can draw from it, from his life, about how it applies to ours and stuff. And so so we're gonna start at the basics. I got chapter 1 listed on your notes because the story kind of starts there, but we're not going to really read it. I'm just going to kind of overview chapter 1 a little bit. Chapter 1 talks about that Joseph had died, because we know Joseph at the end he was saving the people of Egypt from the famine, and then he brought his family down. Well, his family of 12 brothers and father and mother and all that stuff turned into millions of people, and the Egyptians were getting scared that they were getting outnumbered, and if they got attacked, they were afraid that the Hebrew people were going to join the people that were attacking them, and there'd be no way to stand against them. So Pharaoh came up with this great plan to kill all the male babies that were born of Hebrew women. And stuff. And so, the only verse I'm going to look at here, it says, he says in chapter 1:16, he says, when you do the duties he's talking to the midwives in Egypt. He said, when you do the duties of a midwife for the Hebrew women and see them on their birth stools, if it is a son, you shall kill him. But if it is a daughter, then she shall live. Okay. So he wanted all the male children killed. at birth. And so, but the midwives didn't want to do that. And so the midwives feared God in some way and stuff. And so they didn't want to do that. And they wouldn't do it. And when he talked to them again and said, why aren't you doing this? And they said, well, the Hebrew women give birth a whole lot quicker than Egyptian women. And by the time we get there, they're already done, And so, so they weren't doing it. So then he came up with this great plan that he wanted all Hebrew male children that were born thrown into the river and killed that way. That way they drown and be killed. And that's how chapter 1 ends, is he's telling everybody to, okay, fine. If this isn't going to work, then fine. Throw them, after they're born, throw them into the river. Okay? And so we're going to pick it up in chapter 2 now. And so, verses 1 through 4, he says, and a man of the house of Levi went and took his wife, a daughter of Levi. So the woman conceived and bore a son. And when she saw that he was a beautiful child, she hid him for 3 months. But when she could no longer hide him, she took an ark of bulrushes for him, daubed it in asphalt and pitch, and put the child in it, and laid it in the reeds by the riverbank. And his sister stood far off to know what would be done to him. All right, so we're going to stop there. We're going to talk about this, okay? First of all, if you were a couple, a Hebrew couple, would you even be trying to have children during this time? Knowing that this is what's going to, if it's a boy, you're going to have to kill him? I mean, could any of you imagine?
Choice, but,
Well, yeah, and I get that, not by choice, but, but, I mean, could any of you kill your child like that? Mm-hmm. Some days I kind of wish I had thrown Robbie in the river, but, but but no, overall, I'm glad he's so if he ain't going to be here, then I get to talk about him. So,
I was going to say, that man, I know there's no way he could think like a woman, but the queen or whoever, they had no concept of what a child's life. I mean, most of us would, even at our age, right, Bonita, we would give our lives for a newborn baby or something.
Yeah.
We get in the way.
Yeah. And doesn't it show that way back here during these times, this Egyptian king, this Pharaoh, had no value for human life.
Right.
And here we are now. That's right. We got killings going on. We got abortion going on, and everything. I mean, I was talking with Pam about this. I said, so this is almost like, except that they were already born. So, but this is pretty close to being like the first abortions. You're killing the baby as soon as it comes out. I mean, it's just that they're, so, and stuff, but it's...
And they have no idea what that does to the mother.
Well, right. I mean, exactly. And stuff. And so, but, so this woman, his mother, she put him in the river.
Oh, but he was protected.
Well, I mean, she followed the rules. She put it, he said, put him in the river. Well, she put him in the river, and she didn't know what was going to happen to him. I mean, the basket could have tipped over and he could have fell into the water and been drowned and whatever. I mean, but she put him in the river in the reed area along the bank, go down there where the spider lilies are and put a basket with a baby in it down there and stuff, it's kind of in that shallow area or whatever. So, I mean, she gave him the best chance she could to survive. And then the sister stood off, to see what would happen, because I'm sure that the mother couldn't possibly bear to watch what was going to happen and stuff. And so, but we see that she did the spirit of the law. I mean, we all hear at the time, people talk about doing the law and then doing the spirit of the law. This would be the spirit of the law, because she put him in the river, but he didn't specifically say you gotta, you can't put him in a basket or whatever, and stuff. So, but we know that that was the intent. But so she did, and I don't know if she had gotten caught by the Egyptians, how that would have worked out as far as court or whatever they had before him and stuff, that she would have had to have gone through and stuff. But that's, she was trying to do what she could. But so she puts this 3-month-old in the river, and in the basket in the river. Okay. And then we're going to see here in verses 5 through 10 that God provided for Moses. All right. It says here, then the daughter of Pharaoh came down to bathe at the river, and the maidens walked along the riverside. And when she saw the ark among the reeds, she sent her maid to get it. And when she opened it and saw the child, and behold, the baby wept. So she had compassion on him and said, this is one of the Hebrew children. Then his sister said to Pharaoh's daughter, shall I go call a nurse for you from the Hebrew women, that she may nurse the child for you? And Pharaoh's daughter said to her, go. And the maiden went and called the child's mother. Then Pharaoh's daughter said to her, take this child away, nurse her for me, and I will give you your wages. So the woman took the child and nursed him. And this child grew, and the child grew, and she brought him to Pharaoh's daughter, and he became her son. So she called his name Moses, saying, because I drew him out of the water. Okay? So the sister stood off and saw, and seized the opportunity that when the maidens and Pharaoh's daughter saw that found the baby and were looking at it, she went up and asked, do you want me to get a Hebrew woman to nurse it for you? And she said yes. Okay, so kind of always made me, I guess she was a daddy's girl, because here she is, Pharaoh's daughter. Pharaoh's wanting all these kids killed, but yet she gonna bring one home. So she must have been a daddy's girl that got whatever she wanted, and and she and so God was being provident.
That is, would make you want to stand up and shout if you were hearing that the first time.
Oh, exactly, because not only did the mother of the child get to be with the child longer until she was done nursing him, but she got paid for it.
Right.
I mean, so, okay, God really took care of that situation and provided, and
it's like to the king, just try killing all these babies.
Right.
Just go ahead.
Yeah.
And try.
Exactly. So, and then because he was in Pharaoh's house, he got all the best education. He got all the best stuff. He got the best Tonka toys at Christmas. I mean, he got everything, He didn't get them cheap plastic ones they got now. He got the metal ones, I mean, probably gold plated, I mean, he got the best of everything. He was treated as royalty, as Pharaoh's grandson. And so, because the daughter basically adopted him and brought him in, and raised him. Once he was done weaning and nursing and whatever, and she weaned him, brought him to her, and now how hard was that for the mother at that point to give the child over? I mean, we hear about people giving babies up for adoption and stuff, like giving children up for adoption and stuff like that, and that's basically what she's doing here. She's letting Pharaoh's daughter adopt him, but she knew that he would be safe that way. And so the choice was either this child could be killed, or I let him call him Moses, and he could be saved and be treated as royalty. So kind of hard decision, but almost a no-brainer. I mean,
yeah, you'd always choose life like when they were going to chop that. Exactly.
So, exactly. So, and so we see that he's God's providing. God's for this child. Okay. So, and then go on here, 11 through 15. It says, now it came to pass in those days when Moses was grown, that he went out to his brethren and looked at their, and looked at their burdens. And he saw an Egyptian beating a Hebrew, one of his brethren. So he looked this way and that way, and when he saw no one, he killed the Egyptian and laid him in the sand, and hid him in the sand. So when he went out the second day, behold, 2 Hebrew men were fighting, and he said to the one who did the wrong, why are you striking your companion? Then he said, who made you prince and judge over us? Do you intend to kill me as you killed the Egyptian? So Moses feared and said, surely this thing is known. When Pharaoh heard of this matter, he sought to kill Moses. But Moses fled from the face of Pharaoh and dwelt in the land of Midian and sat down by a well. Okay, first of all, here we see that Moses is grown. Okay, a lot of people, a lot of Bible scholars believe he was probably about 40 years old at this point. Okay, Moses' life, by a lot of scholars, that is broken up in 3 sections. His early childhood before he fled to Midian, and they feel he was about 40 years old then. And then he spent 40 years in Midian, as we're going to see here in a few minutes. And then when God, at 80 years old, he sees the burning bush and gets called back to do all the work that God has called him. So, and then he's basically, it's about believed to be about, he was about 120 when he died and stuff. So, you know, it's like 40-year segments. So, you know, so he's out in seeing, and he knows he's Hebrew. He's obviously been, he's aware of it, even though he's been in Pharaoh's house, and we don't know how much the princess told him about his heritage and everything, and what happened with him when he was a child and stuff like that. We don't know how much of that because it doesn't say, but you know, we do know, and that he knows he's Hebrew, and because he's out and he's concerned about the plight of the Hebrew people, of his brethren. He sees an Egyptian beating him, and he looks, it says here, he looks this way and that way and doesn't see anybody, and then so he kills him and thinks he's got away with it. But hello, there's a Hebrew dude standing right there.
It was a Hebrew who called him out, right?
It was a Hebrew that called him out. So this guy, when he went back home that night, he told everybody, oh, that Moses guy, he went and, you know, this Egyptian was beating me, and he went and killed him, put him in the sand or whatever. I mean, he was glad he did, but, you know, probably, but that's how this other, I mean, you know, really, I mean, he thought he got away with it. Obviously, the Egyptian royalty education wasn't that good. So, because, you know, that's just kind of common sense there, you know. So, I mean, you think he might have got away by no Egyptian seeing it, but, you know, and then I guess he just figured that his brother, and the Hebrew one he saved, or he stopped the beating of, was probably not going to say anything, was going to, I guess that's what he was thinking. I don't know. But once it was found out, he was scared, and then Pharaoh got wind of it, and Pharaoh wanted to kill him. Don't matter if he's the grandson, adopted grandson or not. He's a dead man. I'm going to kill him. I want him dead. Bring him in here so we can kill him. So he runs. He flees. He goes to a country area, whatever it is, of Midian. Okay? And stuff. And so, but, and so here we see that this is, you know, okay, so now he's got to give up the life he's had, the life of royalty, the life of being in the palace, being whatever, even though he was an Egyptian, you know, he still was having a decent life or whatever. So, okay. And so we see that he's flees to Midian and he sits down by a well. Okay. And so 16 through 22. Now the priest of Midian had 7 daughters, and they came and drew water, and they filled the troughs of water to their father's flock. And the shepherds came and drove them away. But Moses stood up and helped and watered their flock. When they came to Reuel, their father, he said, how is it that you have come so soon today?" And they said, "An Egyptian delivered us from the hand of the shepherds, and he also drew enough water for us and watered the flocks." So he said to his daughters, "Well, where is he? And why is he that you have left the man? Call him, and he may come eat bread." Then Moses was content to live with the man, and he gave Zipporah, his daughter, to Moses, and she bore him a son, and called him Gershom, for he said, "I have been a stranger in a foreign land." Okay? All right, so here we see, again, God's providing for him. He sits down at this well, he stands up, he does the right thing for the daughters. They come, and the shepherds are trying to drive him away. And it sounds like this goes on quite a bit. It happens either every day or a lot, that, because the father was surprised that they came back so quick and everything and stuff. And then when he finds out that Moses helped him, he says, "Well, why didn't you bring the guy? Why didn't you bring him back?" And everything and stuff. And so I guess they go find him and bring him back, and he ends up getting married to one of the daughters, gets adopted into this family. So he's getting adopted into, another family. God's providing for him. God's taking care of him. And he's a priest of Midian. So here he is. He's got another decent life, family that he's joining and everything. And so he's married to one of his daughters, and then he has a son. And he calls him a Jeshoram or whatever, Jeshurun, there you go. And because I have been a stranger in a foreign land. So he's okay. He's in, he's acknowledging that he's doesn't normally stay there. He's not normally there. Okay. So here we see that God is providing for him. He's taking care of him. Even when Moses doesn't realize it, he's still taking care of him. But Moses is making the choices of doing the right thing. I mean, yeah, killing the Egyptian was not the exact right thing, but he was standing up for the Hebrew. And that, sometimes we all get a little carried away. Sometimes, So, not that killing is right, but that's, sometimes we let the temper get away from us. And again, that's no justification, but there's where a lot of people, when people say that they're not qualified to serve God or whatever because of this, that, and whatever, and Moses was a murderer, and David was an adulterer and a murderer, and this one was this, and this one was that, and and whatever. But God uses people that are not perfect at all. And we see that this was the biggest plight on Moses' life so far, is that he did have this act of killing somebody. And, but he was taking up for his fellow brother, a fellow Hebrew. Okay. So he's building a life down there. Okay. He's married. He's got a son. A lot of scholars feel that he's here in Midian about 40 years before the burning bush and stuff. And so, okay. So now 23 through 25. Now it happened in the process of time that the king of Egypt died. When the children of Israel groaned, then the children of Israel groaned. Pay attention to that. Then the children of Israel groaned because of their bondage, and they cried out, and their cry came up to God because of the bondage. So God heard their groanings, and God remembered his covenant with Abraham and Isaac and with Jacob. And God looked upon the children of Israel, and God acknowledged them. Okay? So Pharaoh died. King Pharaoh, he died. He's old and whatever, and he's died. So now the threat to kill Moses is gone. So just as when the Pharaoh that was in charge that put Joseph second in command, when he died, people, as years went on, they forgot about what Joseph did to save the Egyptian people. And so it's convenient how some people remember certain things and others don't. And we see that in today's world too, that we remember certain things about this leader and about that leader, that this guy did that and this guy did that, and whatever. And we see that it's kind of interesting to see what's remembered. Um, and a lot of times, and even with us as people, that we don't have to be leaders of nations and things like that. A lot of people just remember the mistakes that we made, or the things that they feel that we've done wrong. Like Miss Linda's going to remember all day that Mr. Hank had a donut. Yeah. Doesn't matter if he says a great prayer and leads a great Bible study and saves some lives on the way home or something like that. She's going to remember that he had a donut today. Yeah. So, because that's what we do as humans, and I'm not picking at you, okay? But that's what we do as humans. We tend to remember the negative. We look at the mistakes. We look at and we all we tend to do that. And it doesn't matter. A lot of people say that women are the only ones that do it, but that's not right, because men do it too. Okay, it's but so the king has died. So, and what I wanted you to notice was, once the king died, so now it's been 80 years, basically, if the scholars are right. It's been 80 years since Moses was born, or pretty close to 80 years since Moses was born. And now the people are crying out because their bondage is so bad. What were they doing 80 years ago when this dude wanted to kill the babies? Why weren't they crying out then? That would be, for me, I would be like, okay, God, what are we doing here? We need to, okay? But it says, then the children of Israel groaned because of their bondage. And they cried out. And their cry came before God because of their bondage. Right? So apparently they had it good in some ways there.
Well, they had to work very hard, so they most likely had sufficient food.
Yeah.
I mean,
I guess, yeah.
That was really hard work they did.
Yeah, it was.
Really, really hard.
Yeah.
And that's a warm land.
Oh, yeah.
So,
yeah. So, but.
Probably figured if they spoke up, the king would kill them.
Well, that's true.
Probably true.
Yeah, exactly. So, and apparently who the next in line, we're not told who the next in line is yet. Apparently they followed in the same path of, these Hebrew people are trying to outnumber us. We gotta stunt their population growth. We gotta stop them. We can't have, I get the principle of kill the males, because the males are going to be the ones that are going to go fight against us. But the females are the ones that produce more babies. So why weren't they killing the females? If you want to stop the population growth, stop the source. But I'm grateful that they didn't. But well, it does. Yes, it does. But and I get so. But they were just more concerned about the fact of that the men would fight against the Egyptians and stuff. They were looking at that, and probably also they were probably figuring that they could probably marry the girls and have half Hebrew, half Egyptian babies, whatever you want to say, and stuff. So that could have been, the women probably had some value to them for that as well, unfortunately. But yeah, so 80 years after Moses is born and protected by God, they cry out, and God has already started a plan in place to rescue them. Wasn't what they thought it would be. Is there another time in the Bible where we see that God brought in a rescue plan by a baby?
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, for sure.
Right.
Interesting. interesting how he gets his baby.
Yeah. And, you know, when I was reading my commentary and stuff, there's, you know, Jeremiah, it talks about to him too, that, you know, he says, I knew you, or you knew me when I was in my mother's womb and stuff. And so he had Jeremiah singled out, you know, some of the prophets he had picked out and singled out to before they were even born, that he wanted them to do his work and things like that. So God has a habit of starting with a baby. And Moses is one of the examples of that. And yeah, he protected Moses and he took care of him and everything. And so, you know, and God hears us, because I'm sure that there was some groanings going on during that 80 years. But God, the groanings got a lot, apparently. And so God hears us and he knows, and he's got a plan. And so you got to stay faithful in your prayers to God, that if you're not seeing a result, God may already be working on it, but you're just not seeing it, because God does things in ways that we don't even be able to conceive or perceive, because we have our own, I don't want to say bias, but we have our own way of doing things. You know, we look at things and say, oh, if that were me, I would do this. I would do this. And this is the way I would handle it. And we look at it that way. But God doesn't work that way. God has his own plan of things. And a lot of times he's already, so if you're praying for something right now, we know, we've heard the story numerous times that Brenda Bradley was praying for Junior for like 30 years.
I know somebody else in my past, in another state area. She prayed for her husband 30 years, even more.
Yeah. I watched my mom.
The very same reason.
Yeah.
Brenda prayed.
Well, my dad wasn't like Junior was, but still, my dad was not saved, and my mom prayed for him, and I know they were married for 25 years before he became saved, and then he did get saved, and so, you know,
We want
you just don't.
Instantaneous.
Right, exactly. So during the discipleship yesterday, one of the guys said, "Do you want microwave faith, or do you want crockpot faith?" And it's like, where it takes a while. Your faith, you need to have crockpot faith, that you got the faith that even though it takes a while. But if you want the instantaneous microwave faith, that you pray about something and you want an answer before, right after you say amen, that's not going to work.
Well, that's just like our oldest granddaughter, was saved back in March.
Okay. Well, that's great.
And then
Yeah.
she was baptized that was on March 30th.
Yeah.
She was best moved there. But, and I think of how she suffered mostly from a divorce.
Mm.
But it was not, she walked away from that with not with half of anything.
Yeah.
Like zero of anything.
Mm-hmm.
But maybe that's what it is.
Yeah. Sometimes that's exactly what it takes. Yeah.
One or two people, even in the family, mentioned that, and you talk to her
not
about 5 minutes, and you don't have.
Well, there you go. Right.
Doubts about her.
There you go. And that's not for us to judge either.
No. Well, right, but
so
I have a question about verse 19.
Sure.
Well, it's an Egyptian. Those girls said that an Egyptian delivered them.
Yep.
Well, back in earlier, he was known as a
Hebrew,
and everybody probably knew he was a Hebrew.
Mm-hmm.
Maybe by the looks, maybe. But now here they identified him as a.
Well, he grew. I would say that yes. Well, he had the look of a Hebrew. First of all, everybody knew that there was a lot of Hebrews in the land of Egypt at that point.
Well, that's true.
First of all. Second of all, he did grow up in Pharaoh's palace. He was taught the ways of the Egyptians. He probably had mannerisms that he picked up that was Egyptian. His accent.
Maybe not just looking at him. But.
Right. Not just looking at him, but the way he spoke and the way he acted and whatever was probably because if he spoke Egyptian and not Hebrew, because he probably knew both, then, you know, and I'm sure he knew Egyptian because he grew up in the palace and all that. So that was probably why they felt that they called him an Egyptian at that point. It's because, right.
That's true.
Yeah. So, and so that would be my, not because of his physical looks so much, but because other than like the clothing and the other stuff and whatever, but his mannerisms and, you know, plus if you're take it from me, if you're in an area long enough, you start picking up the accent.
Okay. Well, people say to me, where you're from,
Huh?
I say
Somewhat.
Texas.
Somewhat, yeah.
You don't sound that way.
Yeah.
I said, you give me 10 minutes.
Yeah. So, you know.
My
Now-
family are good friends in Texas.
Yeah.
And I
Yeah.
don't
Right. Exactly. Exactly. If I go back to New England, I'm back in New England. I'm back in New England for a day, and none of you are going to be able to understand what I'm saying. Okay? So, yeah. Yes, it does.
Yes,
So,
I'm
you know,
from Texas.
but yeah. So,
At least you can
All right.
understand the people, though you're
yeah.
listening to. Some people can't
Yeah.
understand.
Right. Right. I still remember the first time that I took Nicole up there, see my sister, my niece and stuff like that or whatever. And every time my niece grew up in Maine, whereas the rest of us in New Hampshire, and Maine has a different accent than the area I grew up in New Hampshire. And my niece's accent was really thick. And every time my niece spoke, Nicole would just look at me and say, "What did she say?" And I'm like, so I had to translate for her because she couldn't understand what she was saying. So, but yeah, so yeah, so we're gonna, everybody enjoy that, get something out of it that you might not have known. Yeah. So, okay,